Crocodiles are among the most deadly apex predators, with high aggression and territorial behavior, making them especially dangerous while in captivity. Whether they are held captive in a zoo for people to enjoy, or they are being farmed for their expensive skin, if you were to fall inside of their enclosure, they would rip you apart in seconds. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times someone has fallen into a crocodile pit and was fatally mauled. Welcome to Final Affliction. The crocodiles of Indonesia are a different kind of breed from the typical ones sun-basking in zoos. They are known for their unparalleled cunningness, a trait that has made them formidable predators and survivors for millions of years. On an annual basis, these ancient reptiles are responsible for the deaths of more than 200 souls in Indonesia alone. They are masterful survivors who use their cunningness to outwit their prey and competitors. They attack ferociously, leaving a trail of carnage in their wake. 44-year-old Deasy Tuwo was a wildlife research scientist working in the CV Yoshiki laboratory in Indonesia. The pearl farm, where the laboratory was located, had illegally kept a group of crocodiles, which usually basked by the swamps. Among the crocodiles was one named Mary. Mary was 17 feet in length and weighed a staggering 1,300 pounds, thanks to his protein-filled diet of tuna, chicken, and beef. Being an animal lover, Deasy found it refreshing to feed Mary, who never fed on frozen foods or carcasses that were more than a day old. Everything had to be fresh. On the 10th of January 2019, Deasy clocked in and was the first employee to arrive at the lab. It was a warm Friday morning, and the rising sun's rays reflected on the green pools in the pearl farm. Deasy took fresh chunks of meat and headed to her favorite crocodile, Mary, for the routine feeding. The crocodile saw her approaching and with a swift flick of its powerful tail, propelled itself out of the water. Its body tensed with anticipation, with its beady eyes locked onto the bucket of meat. Deasy approached the enclosure with slow and cautious movements, wholly aware of the danger lurking beyond the concrete wall. She stood by the enclosure and raised one lump above the 8-foot-tall wall. The crocodile stood on its hind legs and grabbed the meat mid-air faster than the eye could follow, before swallowing it whole. Its sleek, scaly form glistened in the morning sun as it gracefully landed back on the floor. Deasy could see the rippling muscles beneath its skin working in choreographed harmony to execute the impressive leap. Her jaw dropped in awe as she watched Mary's acrobatic display. She continued to feed the reptile, marveling at its sheer power and grace. It was as if it was dancing with her, a graceful but deadly partner in their gory routine. She felt a sense of respect and admiration for Mary. Here she was, witnessing an ancient reptile showcasing the raw power and beauty of nature, a true force to reckon with. As she raised the last piece of meat over the wall, the crocodile choreographically stood on its rear and leaped a little higher than the previous times, clamping its jaws around both the meat and Deasy's left hand. Deasy had been so engrossed in admiring the creature that she forgot to keep her hand high enough, far from the crocodile's reach. She shrieked in pain as Mary's finger-long teeth punctured her skin and sliced her flesh. It then came thudding down, pulling Deasy over the wall and into the enclosure. Deasy heard her bones crushing on the impact of the fall. Mary then did the crocodile's typical death roll with Deasy's left arm still in his mouth. Deasy's body convulsed as the crocodile continued to tear her, shaking her like a chew toy. Her screams echoed through the air, a desperate plea for help that went unanswered. Blood spattered across the ground, and her screams began to grow fainter as her strength began to wane. Mary's powerful muscles worked in unison. He shook his head from side to side, rolled and twisted, ripping the flesh and bone from Deasy's body. The sounds of bones crunching and flesh tearing filled the air as Deasy screamed in agony. On the floor, she rolled over and glanced towards Mary, and their eyes met. She was staring right at her with cold, unblinking eyes. Her arm was long gone, down the guts of the creature. Crocodiles are unable to chew their food and therefore swallow it whole. They have the most acidic digestive system of any animal, capable of digesting bones, horns, and hooves. They are also known to swallow small stones known as gastroliths, which help grind their prey. Deasy's heart pounded in her chest as she desperately searched for a way out of the death ring. She was now bleeding profusely and in agonizing pain. As she scrambled to her feet, she could feel the hot breath of the crocodile on her heels and the sound of its massive body slithering across the concrete floor echoing in her ears. She scanned the walls, hoping to find a crack or handhold to grip onto, but they were perfectly smooth and offered no escape. The crocodile was gaining on her, its jaws snapping just inches from her feet. With a surge of adrenaline, she launched herself towards the walls and began scaling like a human spider with her remaining arm. Her fingers searched frantically for a grip, but the smooth surface offered none. She then lost her footing and slipped, falling straight into the murky water. She had now jumped from the frying pan to the fire, as the waters were Mary's ideal hunting grounds. She had nowhere to run and was now at the mercy of Mary. Mary slipped into the water and began swimming towards her. Deasy frantically pumped her arm and legs to propel her towards the other side, but with a missing arm, she was too slow to outrun the vicious reptile. Within seconds, the crocodile had caught up with her and lunged itself with its jaws open, then clamped onto Deasy's torso. Deasy let out a screeching scream while yelling for help, but the crocodile was efficient and merciless. It tore her torso open, and her intestines and other internal organs were exposed, staining the water red. Deasy flailed her arm, beating the surface of the water as she struggled to stay afloat. However, her remaining arm ended up in the tight grip of the crocodile's teeth. It then dragged her into the depths, where her lungs burned with the need for air. If a crocodile is unable to snap the neck of its prey, it drags it underwater and holds it to drown. And this was the case with Deasy. She could feel her life fading away. The water churned with blood as the beast continued to pull her under. Deasy knew that her fate had been sealed and closed her eyes, bracing for death. Deasy was always the first to report to work, and if not around, she would inform her colleagues of her absence. So as time went by, the other workers became a little concerned about the whereabouts of their laboratory leader, who was known to be punctual. They hoped that a minor, unavoidable circumstance had held her, and that she would report later in the day. However, in the mid-morning hours, around 9 a.m., terror spread on the farm when someone spotted a strange shape in Mary's enclosure. A body was lazily drifting on the surface of the water, facing down. The strange shape then started gliding on the surface of the water towards the dry concrete floor. It was then that the horrified staff saw the crocodile emerge with Deasy's savaged body between its jaws. Her left hand was nothing but a mangled stump, and her torso badly mutilated. The staff's minds struggled to comprehend the sheer brutality of the attack. They were afraid of venturing into the predator's enclosure and immediately notified authorities at the Tambariri police station. A rescue team consisting of the police and officers from North Sulawesi Natural Resources Conservation Agency immediately jumped into action to retrieve Deasy's body. However, the relentless crocodile wasn't ready to let go of its prized catch. As they approached Mary, he thrashed his powerful tail back and forth in a wild display of strength and fury. His hiss cut through the air like a jagged blade, leaving the rescuers in fear. His eyes blazed with a fierce intensity, and his hiss was a clear message that he was ready to protect his kill. The handlers retreated and grabbed their sedation gun. They had seen enough of Mary's aggression. The sedated crocodile was then strapped on a flatbed truck and ferried away to a wildlife rescue facility, where medical tests were conducted that confirmed it had indeed consumed Deasy. Staff at the CV Yoshiki laboratory described Deasy as a quiet lady who loved animals. They were deeply devastated by the death of the head of the lab. However, they noted with concern how Mary had shown prior signs of aggression, having previously attacked and killed another crocodile that had ventured into his pool. The Sulawesi Natural Resources Conservation Agency officials blamed the Japanese owner of the facility, who was illegally keeping these crocodiles as pets. He was charged and later received a 10-year prison sentence for being the primary cause of Deasy Tuwo's horrifying final affliction. When we think of farming, we typically think of fields of wheat or a herd of cows. But in some parts of the world, crocodiles are farmed. They are produced not only for their meat, but for their skins and eggs as well. It is a big business in places like Cambodia, where it provides a living for many families. But unlike farming cows and sheep, this farming is a deadly game. When your livestock consider you as their prey, you know you need to be tough to survive. One wrong move, and it could be game over. Luam Nam was a veteran in the business of crocodile farming. He was 72 years old and farmed more than 40 crocodiles on his land. His farm was one of more than 900 across Cambodia, just outside Siem Reap, Cambodia's second-largest city. 60% of the kingdom's crocodile farms are situated in this region. The climate is ideal for crocodile production, but not much can be said of the conditions in which they are kept. In Cambodia, Siamese crocodiles and saltwater crocodiles are the most common species to be farmed. Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan are the biggest importers of crocodile products in the world. They consume the meat and use different body parts in traditional medicine and pharmaceuticals. More than 1 million skins are exported by crocodile farmers every year, and these are highly prized in the fashion industry. A crocodile farmer can expect a crocodile's value to be double what was paid to grow and harvest it, but prices vary across the world, and the industry in Cambodia has seen a steady decline in the value of its commercial crocodiles. In a bid to keep production costs down and cleaning to a minimum, in Cambodia, crocodiles are confined to concrete enclosures and fed dead fish, corn flour soaked in blood, and chunks of meat. It is a miserable existence for these prehistoric reptiles. Luam's family knew just how dangerous the business was. Luam had many close calls before. Keeping the highly intelligent animals in unnatural environments could drive them mad with aggression. His farm was a concrete pit. In the center, there was a rectangular freshwater pool in which the crocodiles could swim and cool off. It was green and murky. The surrounds were all made of cold, hard concrete. There was no environmental enrichment for the giant reptiles. It was a bleak environment. Steel steps led down to the ground from walkways above. Wooden planks balanced across raised concrete pillars helped Luam move around without entering the enclosure. But it was a dangerous and precarious setup. One slip and he would plummet into the concrete pit and the eagerly waiting crocodiles below. Fish that cost 50 cents per kilo were tossed from these walkways. Younger crocodiles were fed daily, but the adults usually only once a week. Although they were fed in this way, their killer instincts were still there. Fights often broke out, the overcrowded enclosure erupting into a pit of loud hisses, thrashing water, and fearsome biting matches. Luam had erected metal cages in which the female crocodiles could lay their eggs. These were a precious commodity. He sold them to other farms or on the Chinese market. But accessing the eggs could often prove challenging. The females were protective of their clutch. They would hiss at Luam if he came too close. His only form of defense was a stick that he held out in front of him. It was the only barrier between him and his deadly livestock. A crocodile's jaws can exert a force of more than 3,500 psi. they would snap the stick in half like a matchstick, but better the stick than his leg. In May 2023, Luam arrived at his farm as usual. His family had begged him for years to give up the business. They knew how dangerous it was for him, and at 72 years old, he certainly wasn't getting any younger. The prices for crocodiles and their products were steadily declining as direct markets were fluctuating and there was less demand from neighboring countries. But changing careers at that age would be difficult for Luam. He knew his business inside out, and it just about provided for his family. He took pride in being the president of the local Crocodile Farmers Association. There was no way he was giving up now. Adult females used to reach between $500 and $600, but in recent years had dropped to $150. The profitability of crocodile farming in Cambodia was dropping, but it was all Luam had ever known. A female crocodile was inside one of the metal nesting cages that morning. She was protecting her clutch when Luam arrived on the scene. The crocodiles typically laid between 20 and 60 eggs between February and May, and the hatchlings would emerge between April and July. In 2019, these babies would fetch a price of $7 to $10 per head, but by 2020, this price had dropped to just $2.50. Cambodia's crocodile farmers were barely breaking even. Each and every crocodile produced on the farm was valuable, and Luam needed to make sure that all the eggs made it to hatching. Luam climbed down the metal steps and into the enclosure, keeping his eyes on the inhabitants closely. The egg-laying cage was on a raised platform, set back from the rest of the crocodiles. As he approached the female, she hissed loudly, her mouth open, displaying all 70 of her lethal, sharp teeth. Luam hit the cage with his stick. The crocodile thrashed her tail from side to side. She was angry. Luam prodded her, and she began to move out of the cage. As she neared the edge of it, she suddenly lunged at Luam's stick. She grabbed it in her jaws and clamped down. Instinctively, Luam pulled the stick backwards, but in doing so, he lost his footing and fell. He landed on the ground of the crocodile enclosure with a heavy thud. The enormous reptiles wheeled around. All 40 of them had their eyes locked onto the small farmer. They spotted him lying helplessly on the ground, and before he had a chance to get to his feet, they ran over to him. Luam knew that he was in serious trouble. He had never been in that situation before, and he knew what was coming. In an instant, some crawled out of the water, dragging themselves onto dry land. Others, basking on the side of the pool, leapt to their feet. As they ran towards him, their tails swayed from side to side, and their short legs moved quickly underneath their enormous, heavy bodies. Their mouths were closed in their characteristic toothy grin, but as they came within striking distance, they opened, gaping wide. To them, this was fresh meat at feeding time. Before he could react, one quickly lunged forward and grabbed Luam's leg. It shook its head, shaking the man violently from side to side. He cried out and tried to reach down and release himself from the vice-like grip. But as he did so, another launched an attack, this time biting down on his arm. It violently ripped his arm from his body and swallowed it, whole, in front of him. Blood poured onto the concrete. Luam was desperate. Nobody was around to hear his cries. Nobody knew the danger he was in. Luam continued to fight back. He was losing blood. He could feel the raw power from the crocodiles as they lunged at him and bit down. Another crocodile joined the feeding frenzy and pulled Luam so hard that he felt his hip give way. He was dragged across the concrete, scraping his back as he was pulled towards the stagnant green water. Then, with an almighty splash, he was dragged in. The 40 crocodiles slid into the pool after him, each lunging at the body, pulling and tugging. One performed a death roll. Luam, now barely conscious, held his breath as he was washing machined over and over under the water. He could feel the pressure building in his leg. He could feel the intense searing pain as more and more crocodiles attacked him, taking bites out of him. But he couldn't fight any longer. He couldn't hold them off. It was a losing battle. In less than a few minutes, Luam had lost his fight. His body lay limp in the water. Swirls beneath the surface and splashes around his limbs continued. The green water turned red as the crocodiles feasted, tugging at the corpse. Another crocodile pulled the man's body out onto dry land, and that is where Luan was found when workers arrived at the farm. He was surrounded by a pool of his own blood. His arm was missing, and bite marks covered his body from head to toe. Emergency services were called, but there was nothing they could do for the farmer. He had succumbed to his injuries within minutes of the feeding frenzy. His lifeless body was surrounded by the hungry reptiles, and every time officials tried to get close to him to retrieve his body, the crocodiles hissed and snapped. One crocodile lay just meters away, a prized possession in its jaw. It was Luan's black sandal held tightly between its teeth, a trophy of sorts and a chilling reminder of the terror that must have unfolded earlier that day. When you see the basic setup of some of the world's crocodile farms, it is surprising that there aren't more incidents like this. However, just 4 years earlier, a 2-year-old girl wandered into her family's crocodile farm and was eaten alive in the very same village as Luam Nam's farm. Most of the rural farms have a distinct lack of safety measures in place and very few barriers to stop this kind of thing from happening. It took time and courage before Luan could be pulled from the enclosure by officials. Securing his body meant that now his family were now able to bury him and mourn their loss. They had begged him to sell the farm years ago, and now his business had cost him his life. After his death, Luan's family sold the farm and all the crocodiles in it, something Luan should have done years before, but tragically never did. The very thing that provided him a living all these years had ended up being the cause of his terrifying final affliction. In Bahai City in South China's Guangxi-Zhuangzi Autonomous Region lies a holiday resort called Yintan, or Silver Beach. But this wasn't just any holiday resort. Silver Beach provided deadly entertainment. Typically regarded as the greatest beach in China, the beach is covered in the finest quartz sand that glints and shimmers in the golden sun. It draws people from all over the country and is popular with its water sports and swimming facilities. Beside the beach is the holiday resort, which is full of entertainment for all the family. One form of entertainment were the crocodile shows. Inside a small enclosure, 11 crocodiles feasted on chunks of dead meat thrown into the water or held high in the air for them to leap up to, sometimes jumping 5 feet into the air. Visitors were impressed by their athleticism and power. But the crocodile pool served another purpose for the local children. It had become a bit of a ritual for children from the surrounding primary schools to sneak into the crocodile enclosure and dare each other to get as close as possible to the enormous reptiles. Only those who were brave enough would climb the low-lying wall and drop down into the lair. Armed with wooden sticks, the youngsters would run up to the nearest crocodile and whack it on the head before running back out of the enclosure. It was a cruel form of entertainment, but one which gained the children respect amongst their peers. On April 20th, 2007, a 9-year-old boy called Liu Haiyang was up to mischief. At around 6 p.m. that evening, he and 3 of his friends from CNTN Primary School walked towards the holiday resort. They were each up for the crocodile challenge and walked to the enclosure armed with wooden sticks, slingshots, and handfuls of rocks and pebbles. The resort was quiet. There was nobody about as it was closed for the evening, but the gates weren't locked shut. It was easy to get into, and there was no security. The children walked quickly across the grounds, keeping as quiet as possible. The wall surrounding the crocodile pool was only a meter high, and in some places as low as 55 centimeters, or 22 inches. It was by no means a secure enclosure either for keeping people out or the crocodiles in. In fact, there had been an incident a few years before which very much proved this point. Some of the crocodiles had managed to wriggle down a water drainage pipe that led from their enclosure out to the pristine sands of Silver Beach. Pandemonium had broken out as sunbathers and swimmers were suddenly exposed to several large crocodiles emerging onto the beach. Luckily, nobody was hurt during the mass escape, and the crocodiles were captured and returned to their enclosure. every one of them accounted for. That evening, as Liu climbed the concrete wall, he and his friends ignored the warning signs erected around the enclosure. They very clearly stated the dangers of crocodiles and warned anyone not to climb the wall. But that wasn't going to stop a group of excited 9-year-olds. They dropped down from the wall onto the ground. The crocodiles eyed them suspiciously. Some turned their heads as they basked on the sides of the pool. The children began loading up their slingshots and aiming them at the captive reptiles, pulling back firmly on the elastic and then releasing it. The rocks flew through the air and pummeled the crocodiles. Some flinched, others hissed and slid into the water. Then the real challenge began. One of the children ran up to a crocodile next to the water and, wielding a stick above his head, brought it crashing down on top of the crocodile. He immediately ran back to his friends, squealing with excitement. Now it was Liu's turn. He grabbed the stick and walked up to the same crocodile. But this time the reptile had had enough. It had been battered and bruised, and this wasn't the first time children had disrespected the wildlife and treated them terribly. As Liu brought his stick down on top of the crocodile's head, it suddenly lunged forwards. It snapped its jaws, and in an instant, Liu was dragged by his shirt into the water. He screamed in terror and reached out for his friends who rushed to the pool. One of them tried to grab Liu's outstretched arm, but the young boy was wrenched out of reach at the last second. He was pulled under the water in the shallow pool. Then, as the crocodile readjusted its grip and crunched down on the boy's torso, his friends could see Liu's eyes bulging when he momentarily resurfaced. They could see the terrified look in his eyes. He tried to scream, but no sound came out of his mouth. His friends tried once more to reach out and grab him, but it was too late. The other 10 crocodiles, excited by the commotion and smell of fresh blood, all slid into the water and began tearing at the boy. Liu's friends could only watch in horror as he was torn to shreds by the animals. A cloud of dark red dispersed across the murky water, and the children leapt out of the enclosure and ran for help. Their cries had been overheard by the crocodile keeper. Liu Jiazhen had been hired by the park's owner since the animals had escaped onto the beach. The owner knew he had to make some serious changes to the operations of the park, particularly the management of the crocodiles, and so handed that responsibility to a full-time member of staff. But crocodiles are on the state endangered animal list, and to keep crocodiles of breeding age, owners need to seek permission and permits from forestry and marine departments. Seeing as the park had none of the licenses required for keeping the animals, it was in fact an illegal crocodile pool. But where was the crocodile keeper when Liu was being attacked? Because the pool was closed at the time of the incident, the crocodile keeper, Liu Jiazhen, was inside cooking a meal and didn't notice the children sneaking into the enclosure. When he heard the screams of terror radiating across the park, he rushed out to the crocodile exhibit. What greeted him was a scene of pure horror. He could see the commotion inside the crocodile pool. The water was splashing and swirling as the crocodiles feasted. The boy's body was tugged at and pulled in opposite directions as he floated, semi-submerged in the brown water. When police arrived on the scene, they called in special armed units. Snipers then lured the crocodiles out of the water with raw pork. Smelling the fresh meat, the prehistoric giants emerged from the pool dripping wet, their eyes fixated on the chunks of pork in front of them. They crawled over dry land and began eating it. Now that they were clearly exposed, the snipers then took aim at the crocodile thought to be responsible for Liu's death. They fired 7 bullets into its thick, armored body. It was a huge animal, 2 meters, 6.5 feet in length, and weighing 150 kilograms, or 330 pounds. They dragged the crocodile out of the enclosure and onto a trailer where it could be dissected. When they split open its stomach, the boy's remains were found inside. Although the other crocodiles had taken advantage of the attack, this one was the main culprit and had consumed most of the boy. Following the incident, the pool was drained of all its water, and the remaining 10 crocodiles were removed and relocated to somewhere that had the necessary permits and facilities to accommodate such dangerous animals. This was at the Zhuangqi Endangered Wild Animal Protection Center, a zoo in the regional capital, Nanning. As to be expected, the 3 children who witnessed their friend being torn to shreds were traumatized by the incident. They were incoherent when police questioned them about the attack, in a state of shock. They woke in the night screaming in fear as nightmares gripped them in their sleep. In a statement to media, Lu Wei, a doctor with Bahai People's Hospital, said that the children were receiving ongoing psychological treatment. He urged staff and pupils at the school not to speak about the attack in front of them, whilst they were trying to come to terms with the shock of the tragedy. Courts ruled the crocodile keeper and the entertainment park were responsible for the boy's death and ordered compensation to the boy's family. Liu Haiyang's parents were compensated 220,000 yuan, the equivalent of $30,600, but no amount of money would bring back their beloved son. A dare that was meant to be a bit of fun and had been performed countless times before by pupils from many of the primary schools in the area had ended in Liu Haiyang's terrifying final affliction.